So we'll go ahead and get started here with our .NETNuke Explained Content Edits and Updates webinar. Again, my name is Chris Hammond. I run the training program here with .NETNuke Corporation. Now today's webinar is part of our .NETNuke Explained series. It's a collection of free and recorded webinars. So we are recording this live session. The recording will be made available later today. It'll be available on our website. You should receive an email likely tomorrow with the information on how to access that recording. In addition to today's webinar, we've offered 5 previous webinars covering topics like installation, basic site administration, skinning, module development, and then upgrades for .NETNuke. We don't currently have any additional Explain series webinars coming up, but we do have some additional training webinars coming up. I'll talk about those a little bit later on in the session. In today's course, we're going to go ahead and talk to you about .NETNuke from a content editor perspective. First, I'll give you an overview of the environment that we're currently using. And then we're going to go ahead and log into the website, talk about what logging into the website entails, what that then provides us. We'll give you an overview of a page when you're logged in with edit rights on that page. We'll talk about some of the basics within .NETNuke, such as skins and panes and modules and how those all work together to provide content on your website. We'll also give you an introduction to the control panel so you can see how you can utilize the control panel within .NETNuke to manage your website. And then we're going to spend some time creating pages. We'll go through page settings. We'll place modules on the page that we create. We'll go through the module settings, and we'll dive into the rich text editor within the HTML module to give you an overview of some of the features that rich text editor provides to content editors. So at this point, let's go ahead and jump right in. And actually, before I do that, let me go ahead and point out one other thing. If you have any questions throughout the webinar, please feel free to go ahead and type those into the GoToWebinar interface. I won't be responding to most of those questions until after the presentation is done, but if you want to go ahead and type those in, that way there is a list of questions that I can answer when we're done with the session. If you have questions afterwards as well, you can post those into the interface. So we'll probably spend 15 or 20 minutes answering questions after the presentation itself is completed. And like I said, this is going to be recorded. Those questions and answers will be recorded as well. So currently I have a .NETNuke website set up and running locally. It's running on the URL localhost/.NETNuke. So that means it's running on my local web server. It's accessible to me on my local machine. It's currently running .NETNuke Professional Edition version 6.1.5. So 6.1.5 is currently the latest release of .NETNuke, and the Professional Edition is our Professional Edition. We also have an Enterprise Edition and the Community Edition of .NETNuke. Now, the features that we're going to see for the most part today are available across all of those editions, Community, Professional, and Enterprise. I will point out some of the differences between Professional, Community, and Enterprise and Community as we come across those, as we're dealing with basically permissions and then some of the workflow options within the HTML module. But for the most part, if you are on Community Edition, you should be able to get just as much information out of this session as a user of the Professional Edition. Now, I have my website currently running on a local instance of SQL Server, and that's the database server. We're not really going to deal with the database in this particular discussion, so it really doesn't matter what version of SQL Server it's running on. Now, in order to start managing a .NETNuke website, you need to have a user account that has edit permissions on that website. And there's a couple of different types of users within the platform. We're going to go ahead and talk about those types of users here first before we log in and start managing that account or managing that website. So out of the box, when you install .NETNuke, depending on the approach you took during the installation, you may have one user, you may have 2 users that get created. If you have one user, that user will typically be called the super user or the host account. A host account has access to everything within .NETNuke. One of the features of .NETNuke is the ability to develop and maintain multiple websites, multiple domains, multiple URLs within one installation of the software. So with one database and one collection of files. A host or a super user has the ability to maintain all of those websites or all of those portals across the installation. You might also have an administrator account. The default administrator account when it gets created is going to have a username of admin. You are not limited to that username. You can create additional administrators. But when you have an administrator, it is tied to one particular portal or one particular website. So an admin can maintain one domain, where if you have two domains in your .NET installation, you would typically have two administrator type accounts. You can have multiple administrators within one portal, and you can have multiple administrators across multiple portals. Now, we're going to be logging in and working with the website today primarily as an administrator, but the features we're going to see are features that your content editors would be able to utilize. So in addition to the super user and the administrator accounts, you can create additional accounts within .NET and then assign them edit permissions. You can assign them edit permissions to one or multiple pages within your website. You can also assign them edit permissions to just individual blocks of content on one page in a website. So we'll see some of that when we talk about permissions, but we're not really covering the creation and management of users in this session. We did talk about users in our portal administration webinar a couple of weeks ago. We go into more details on the user and security for user management and security of those users within our portal administration training webinar, which is coming up towards the end of June. When you log into a .NET website, most .NET websites are going to have a link somewhere on the page that you can click on that will take you to the login screen. It is common for some websites, though, to remove that login link. If you have a website that you don't want customers or other people that are visiting your website attempting to log into, it's common practice to remove the login link from the page. It is still possible to access that login link by adding a query string parameter onto the URL. And I have that query string parameter listed here within the parentheses. So if you were visiting a .NET website, you can simply type $CTL equal login on the end of the URL, and that will tell .NET to load the login screen. So let's go ahead and demonstrate the login functionality, and then we're going to take a look at the kind of the basics of a .NET page and start talking about some of those common features. So here in the browser, I have my local instance of .NET Professional Edition. Now, I have made one or two changes to this particular website prior to the webinar. I did activate the Professional Edition license, so the trial message has gone away. And I also removed the Getting Started page. When you install .NET for the first time, you get a Getting Started page, which has a video, once again with my voice in it, that talks about some of the very basics of .NET. That Getting Started page is something that you would typically delete before you would start maintaining your own website. So I went ahead and I deleted that particular page this morning. So here, before we log in, let's talk about some of the common elements on this particular page. At the very top of the page, we have a horizontal navigation. We can see Home, About Us, Our Services, and News and Promotions. Those are 4 different pages on our website. If we clicked on any of those links, it would take us to the individual page for the link that we clicked on. As we log in and have the ability to maintain our website, we will have the ability to create new pages that show up in the navigation and maintain the content or the names of those pages. The top right, to the right of the navigation, we have a search bar there where we can go in and perform a search across this website, or depending on if we want to use the web interface, we can have Google do a search on our website. Now, you would only use the web search when you have a publicly facing website. I have a local website running right now. Google does not have the ability to go through and index the content on this website. From there, we have a logo. Currently, it's set up as the .NET logo. That logo is available to the site administrators. You can come in and you can make changes to that by changing a setting within the website. It will replace that logo with whatever image you provide. To the right of that, we have a login and a register link. Users can log in here, click on the register link, and create new accounts. Then after the register link, for the most part, everything else on the page, from the icons here for the social icons, the banner, and all of the text and the graphics, this is all content within the page. Now, the content within the page is provided through the use of modules, and we'll talk about those modules here in a moment when we log in. But down at the very bottom of the page, into that gray section at the bottom, just after the horizontal rule or horizontal line there, we do have a copyright statement and a privacy statement and a terms of use link. Those three options there are actually content that's being provided by DotNetNuke. It's not content we can easily come in and change once we're logged in, though there are ways to go about modifying that information. So let's go ahead and try logging into our website for the first time. We're going to click on the login link in the top right corner. As I said, if you did not have a login link on your screen, you could come into the URL and simply type in CTL=login into that URL. That will tell DotNetNuke to load the login control. I'm going to go ahead and use the login button though. And when I click on that login link or that login button, it brings up what we call a modal pop-up window with our user login information. So the first thing we need to do is type in our username. We're also going to type in the password. From here we can go ahead and log into the website. We can also click Remember Login. What that will do is tell DotNetNuke to store a cookie on my local computer that will allow me to stay logged into this website. Otherwise, if I didn't check that and I closed the browser, I closed the window, the next time I visited the website, I would no longer be logged in. I would have to log in again. There's also a register and a retrieve password option. We'll go ahead and click on Login, and immediately the page changes ever so slightly. Let's talk about a couple of those changes and what's going on here. The first thing we see at the very top of the page now, it almost looks like it's part of the web browser itself. That's our control panel up at the top. And within the control panel, we have an admin option, modules, pages, and tools. And you can see when we mouse over those four options, we get menus that pop up beneath them. There's a DotNetNuke Professional logo, and then there's a mode option. Now we'll come back and talk more about the control panel and the options within that control panel here in a few moments. After the control panel, we once again see our horizontal navigation, our search options. The login link now says log out, allows us to click on that and log out of the website. And where it said register, it now has our first name and our last name being displayed. The first name for the administrator account is administrator, last name being set as account. Now from there, the rest of the page does start to change a little bit. We are currently logged in as an administrator. We have edit rights on the website. So if we start moving our mouse around, you'll see that as we move our mouse around various content on this page, DotNetNuke starts to highlight some of that content with a little gray box that shows up on the outside. And everywhere we see a unique gray box, that's actually a module. It's a place where we can log in and maintain content. And for each of those modules, you might notice that there is a kind of a faded out or a transparent manage button. If you move your mouse over that manage button, what you'll see is the manage button comes into focus. It's no longer transparent. You also then see a manage or an actions menu that shows up. So for every module on the page here, we have a manage button. We have some actions that we can perform on that module. We're going to come in and deal with those actions a little bit later on in this morning's session. But what we can see here is on this page, we currently have a manage button up here next to the social media icons, a manage button in this red kind of banner section here. We have a manage button under the words welcome to Awesome Cycles. We have a manage button over in that gray box on the right where it says about us, services and news. We have one here where it says check our stuff or check out our stuff. And then down towards the bottom we have two additional manage buttons down in that footer section near the a little bit about us and contact information. So what that tells me is that there are modules in each of those locations where those manage buttons are. Modules within DotNetNuke are how we add and maintain content and functionality to a page within the platform. Now we'll come back and we'll see how to add modules to the page a little bit later on. But let's go ahead and take a look at the way this page functions when you have edit permissions. So we logged into this website as an administrator and it automatically put us into what is known as edit mode. Edit mode can be found up in the top right corner of the control panel. There is a little drop-down list there with a label next to it that says mode. You can find that we have a view, edit, layout, and preview options within the mode selection. If you're using the Community Edition, you have View, you have Edit, and you have Layout. You do not have the Preview option. The Preview option allows you to preview the page for specific mobile devices. It would load up the page within a very fixed window size to be able to mimic what the screen would look like for a mobile device. We're not going to get into demonstrating that feature here in today's webinar, though. What we will be using are the first three options, View, Edit, and Layout. So when we log in for the first time, we're automatically put into edit mode, and that allows us to see those manage buttons for each of the modules or each of the content areas on the page. If we were to switch from edit mode into view mode, when we make that change, the page reloads, and you'll see the content is still there, but the manage buttons are no longer visible. And when we mouse over the various content on the page, we no longer get that gray box that highlights that content that we're mousing over. That's the difference between edit and view mode. When you're in view mode, you're essentially previewing what the page would look like for someone who does not have edit permissions. If you want to be able to edit that content, you need to switch back into edit mode. Go up to the control panel, choose edit, and once again, those manage buttons are back. Now our third mode option there is layout. Layout is useful for being able to visualize the page, visualize where you can place content on a page. In our current configuration, this home page here, we saw that we have a number of different modules here. If I do a quick count, looks like we have probably 7 different modules. But you'll notice with those modules, they're almost all in unique locations. The social media icons are very fixed up in this top right corner here. The red banner stretches out full width of the page, or essentially full width of the page. There's a little bit of extra room on the left and the right. And then beneath the red banner, we have 2 additional columns. So where it says Welcome to Awesome Cycles takes up roughly, let's say, 75% of the page. And then the right column, where the About Us, Services, and News module is, takes up, let's rough guess, 25%. So that's a 2-column layout here. Well, the layout is controlled within DotNetNuke by the use of a skin. A skin within DotNetNuke is a theme or a template that's applied to a page or to multiple pages, and it provides what are known as panes. Panes are locations where we can place modules on a page and then provide content in those modules. So when we're in view or edit mode, we really don't see the panes. We can see that there's a 2-column section here in the middle of the page, but we can't visually see the panes themselves. That's where layout mode comes into play. If we switch from the edit or view option into the layout mode within the control panel, what we're going to see is all of the content on the page actually goes away. But what we can see now is we can see that there are visual representations of panes on the page. So in layout mode here, we can see that there is a pane called Social Media pane. There's one called Content pane. And you'll notice that for each of these panes, they do have a dotted line above and below them. Kind of shows you where that particular pane is in this layout view. So we have a left pane, and you'll notice the dotted lines for the left pane don't stretch out the full width of the page, as the content pane did. Then we have a right pane, which stretches out roughly 25% of the page. When we're in the layout mode, we see the lined representation of panes. We do, however, still see the modules, even though we don't see the content for those modules. So in each of these panes, we can actually see that there is still a Manage button. If we mouse over the Manage button, we see we get the Manage menu. It does have a few less options, though, when we're in layout mode. So we can still see that there's a module here within the Content pane. When I mouse over the Manage button, you can see it highlights that gray border that we saw previously, kind of behind that Manage button, even though the content doesn't show up. Same thing goes for the left pane here. The left pane actually has 2 different modules in it. There's a module that has a title called Welcome to Awesome Cycles. there's also a module that has a title called Check Out Our Stuff. So modules can have titles. They also might have titles turned off so that they don't show up. That's an option we'll see a little bit later on. But when you have a module in a pane and you're in layout mode, you can start to see those modules. So we can tell we have one module in the social media pane, we have one module in the content pane, two modules in the left pane, one module in the right pane. We don't have any modules in the bottom pane. And then down below we have a footer left pane that has one module and a footer right pane that has one module. Now there is an additional pane way down there called footer bottom pane. It does not have any modules in it. Now what we can do within DotNetNuke is if we had a different skin to apply to the website, we could apply that skin to this particular page. And the skin would control the names and locations of those panes. So the panes, once again, are where we can place modules. The content from the modules then would display within that location. Now, one thing I'll point out within the layout mode, and this applies to layout or edit mode, you might notice that in the left pane here where we have this Welcome to Awesome Cycles module, the Manage button is kind of hidden behind the Welcome to Awesome Cycles title. Well, you can actually move a Manage button. If I move my mouse over the button, I click on the button and hold the mouse down, I can drag that Manage button. Now I can only drag it within the module. I can't drag it to another location on the page, but I can move it over to the right here to kind of move it out of the way of the title. Now if I were to refresh the page in the browser, the Manage button would go back to its default location. But if you ever need to move a Manage button, just click on the Manage button, hold your mouse button down, and you can drag it around within that particular pane. Now, in addition to that, you can also, within DotNetNuke, click on a module that has a title. And I just clicked on the word Welcome to Awesome Cycles. I clicked on the word Awesome. If you click on that word and hold the mouse button down, you'll see that we get this blue highlighted box here. Well, what that allows us to do is within DotNetNuke, we can actually use some drag and drop functionality, moving the module around. It is a little tricky in order to move it into the proper pane. Right now I'm having trouble just highlighting some of the additional panes. Right now all I'm able to easily do is move it into the content pane. But if I drag it and then release the mouse, it's going to go ahead and drop that module into that new pane. So it went ahead and it moved the module there, or attempted to move the module there into the content pane. And if we were to go ahead and switch from our layout mode, we'll go back into edit or view. It looks like the drag and drop didn't actually work there. So drag and drop's a little tricky thing. It's kind of cool and flashy. To be honest, there are easier ways to move modules. We'll talk about that as we get into our module settings. All right, so let me go ahead and switch back to the PowerPoint real quick, and we'll start talking about the control panel. We have gone in and talked about the mode option within the control panel. So we're going to use that a couple of different ways as we go throughout the session here today. But let's talk about some of the other features that the control panel is going to provide to you. The control panel gives you the ability to manage pages. So we're going to have the ability to modify settings for an existing page. We're going to have the ability to create new pages. We're going to have the ability to add modules to a page. We also then get the ability to access features that are available to administrators and access features that are available to host users. So let's go ahead and take a look at some of those features. If we switch back over to our browser and we navigate up to the control panel there, as an administrator, we have an admin menu here that allows us to come in and choose some of the various features that are available to administrators. We can go to the site settings page, we can manage languages, user accounts, etc. We covered some of these within the portal administration webinar as part of our Explain series. I'd encourage you to check that out if you're looking for more administrative topics. As a page editor, someone has the ability to edit a page, we can come into the modules menu. And from here, we actually have the ability to start placing modules on a page. And we're going to come back to that and use that functionality here in a few moments. To the right of the modules menu is our pages menu. The first option allows us to come in and start managing settings on the page. We can also add a new page. We can copy the page. We can export or import the page. Now, because we're on the home page, the delete option here is grayed out. We cannot delete the home page of a .NETNuke website. If you wanted to delete the page that was known as home, you would actually have to go into the site settings and change the setting for the home page to choose a different page. Then you could go delete the original page. Underneath the actions for maintaining the current page, we have the ability to add a new page. Right here within the control panel, we can simply give the page a name. We can choose a template, choose where it goes in our menu, and click on Add Page. We'll perform that function here in just a few moments. And we can also make updates to the current page. We can change the name of the page. We can choose where it's going to go in the navigation. We can also choose the skin that's being applied to the page. We can just choose those options, click on Update Page, and that will update the current page that you're on. Now off to the right, we have a fourth option within the control panel called Tools. Gives us some shortcut options to things that we as an administrator might need, the ability to add a user or add a security role or even just upload a file. If we were logged in as a host or a super user, we would actually have some additional options in there. A normal content editor wouldn't have any options within the Tools menu. But as an admin, we do have a couple of shortcuts available to us. So the control panel is going to be useful as we go through and start creating pages and adding modules to those pages, and we'll interface with that. So let's talk about creating pages and then show you how we're going to do that within the control panel. So part of the flexibility of .NETNuke as a dynamic content management system is the ability to create pages on the fly. We can do it all within a browser. Now we're going to utilize the control panel to create pages. There are other ways to create pages. There is a page management page underneath the admin menu. You can create pages from there as well. But we're going to go in, we're going to create a page, and I'll talk about some of the page settings. Now there's two primary settings that you really want to be aware of and how they work, and they are name and title. We'll talk about those here in just a moment. And we're going to talk about the permissions as we create that page and the navigation functionality of where we can place that page within the overall hierarchy of our website. So the ability to create pages within our website, as we've said, is found within the control panel. Within that control panel, if we go ahead and mouse over the Pages menu, we have two ways within the control panel to create a page. I'll show you the simple way, the easiest way to do it right up front, and then we'll come back and look at the more advanced approach. The simple way is here within the Pages menu to come into the Add New Page section and type in the name of a page. So we might type in a page name called Products. Now, when we add a page or create a page in DNN, you have the ability to utilize a page template. A page template will define the modules and the content that gets put on that page when it's created. Out of the box in .NETNuke, you have two templates, one that's called default and one that doesn't have a name. It's just blank. Really, it's not a template. You're just saying don't use a template. The default template will create a page that has a single HTML module on that page. That page will not have any content associated with it, just a module that you can then go through and start configuring content. A blank page would just be a blank page. There would be no modules on it. You would then add your own modules to the page and then configure the content for those. Now you can create additional page templates. That's what the export functionality is up above in the Pages menu. The ability to export a page allows you to create a template based on that page, and then as you go and create new pages, you can base them on that existing template. For us, we're just going to create a blank page to begin with, so we're going to call it Products. We're We're going to choose the template that has nothing selected, and then from there we can choose where the page is going to go in the menu. That's the insert option. So by default, what it's going to do is it's going to insert the page after the home page in the menu. So if you can see the menu back behind the pages menu here, it would insert the products page between the home page and the About Us page within the navigation. Then we can choose to insert it in a different location. If we want to insert it after a different page, we can choose from the drop-down list here and choose where it would load after. So if we wanted it to show up after the About Us page, we could choose that option. Now, in addition to forcing things to be after another page, we can also make them before another page, or we can actually make them a child of an existing page. So if I wanted to add products underneath of the About Us page, I could choose Child Of. Then this would become a sub-page of the About Us page. Now, we don't want to do that for the products page. For now, I'm just going to add the products page before the About Us option. And it is going to be included in the menu, so it will show up in the menu up above. Go ahead and click on Add Page, and that will create our new page. You'll notice that we're now on that page. The page shows up in the menu. If you look at the URL of our browser, we're at localhost/.netnuke/products.aspx. Our breadcrumb shows us that we're on the products page, but you'll notice that there is no content here on the page. We don't have any modules added to this page. We chose not to use a template when we created the page. Now, one thing that we will notice, if I go ahead and I open up a new browser window here where I'm actually not logged into the website, I'm using Google Chrome's incognito option, which basically hides all cookies. If I load a different browser here where I'm not logged in as an administrator, and we hit the website, you'll see that the products page does not exist in the menu. Well, the reason for that is the way that we created that products page, it gets some default permissions defined on the page. And those default permissions are that the page is only visible to administrators to begin with. Or if we were doing that as a content editor, they would only be visible to the role that that content editor was in. So we have to go back now, or after we've configured the page and the content, we would have to go back and change the permissions on that page to make it visible to all the visitors of our website. I'm going to go ahead and close this window. We'll go back to the original Chrome window where we are logged in as that host, or I'm sorry, that admin account. So before we get in to start placing modules on the page, let's go ahead and take a look at some of the page settings here. Within the control panel, if we mouse over the Pages menu again, the very first option in the control panel under Pages is called Page Settings. That will take us to the settings for the current page, the page that we are on. So we go ahead and click on that. That will load the settings up here into this Moto pop-up window. So you can see here within the pop-up, we have our page name called Products. You'll see most of the other options within the settings are not configured. That's because we chose to use the Add New Page option in the control panel. It skips over a lot of these settings. So we have our page name. We also have a setting for our page title. Now, if you do not provide a page title, DotNetNuke will utilize the page name along with the name of the website as our page title. So I can show you that right here on the screen because we currently have a page called Products. And if you notice the little Moto pop-up window that we have open here, if you'll notice the gray bar at the top of that has a string of text there. That's actually the name of our portal. It's called DotNetNuke Content Edits and Updates. Then it has a greater than symbol, and then it has the name of our page, Products. So what's happened here is DotNetNuke has taken the name of our page in conjunction with the name of our website and provided that as our page title. And if that's a sufficient page title, you can go ahead and leave it as that. You don't need to define a page title. But if we wanted to, what we can do is come in here and say, let's call the page title Awesome Cycles Products, because Awesome Cycles is our bicycle business here that we're maintaining a website for. By changing the page title here, once we update the settings and the page reloads, if we were to come back into the page settings, this gray text or the white text here on the gray background would change to the words Awesome Cycles Products. Now, that title also gets used in the browser's title or page title, and the tab title here. So I don't know if you guys can see within the webinar interface or not, but if I move my mouse up to the very top of my browser, the tab up there where it currently says .NET Content Edits and Updates, the greater than symbol, and then Products. That is the page title because we don't have a page title defined. Page titles are important for SEO or search engine optimization purposes. So we can create a page name that controls the URL. It also controls the name and the breadcrumb. We can define a different page title with more descriptive information in it in order to better target the SEO for a current page. Now, some of the other SEO options within the page settings are the description and the keywords boxes here. We're not going to get into those today because we are getting close to running out of time in our session. We've got a lot more to cover here. There are some additional options here within our page settings. We can control the hierarchy. We could move our page within our navigation if we needed to by choosing a different parent page. We also want to take a look at the Permissions tab within the page settings. The Permissions tab allows us to control who can view or who can edit the page. Now, the Permissions tab within .NET Professional and Enterprise editions is more advanced, more granular than the .NET Community Edition permissions grid. In Community Edition, you would have a view column and an edit column. Within Professional and Enterprise, you have more granular permissions here. We're not going to go too far into permissions, but we will talk about how we can go ahead and define who can view the page. We do that through the use of the view column. If you want to make the products page visible to all visitors on our website, meaning anyone who visits the website, it doesn't matter if they're logged in or not, we would simply check the view column here for all users. From there, we'll go ahead and click on Update Page. That's going to update our page permissions. Now, the page reloads. We really don't see a lot of change here unless you look at the browser's tab up at the very top. It now has Awesome Cycles Products as the title within that tab. That's because we changed the page permissions there. And if we were to go back over here to our browser window where we're not logged in, and we were to then navigate to the website again, we now have a page called Products within the menu. Now, as a user, if we were to visit that page, the page is empty. There's no content on it, but that's the next thing we're going to talk about how we can do within .NET. So we go ahead and minimize that window again. We'll go back here over to our admin screen and switch over to the PowerPoint slides real quick. So now that we have a page created, we need to go ahead and start adding content to that page. And when you add content to the page, you're going to do that through the use of a module. Now, there are a large number of different types of modules available within .NET-Nuke. We're going to focus on the HTML module today. The HTML module is one of the most common modules used across all .NET-Nuke websites. While you can provide content through other modules, and many people do, there are literally thousands of different modules available, so we can't cover all of those from a content perspective. So we'll just talk about the HTML module. If you understand the HTML module as we get into things, you'll start to understand other modules in addition to that. So adding a module to the page is going to be managed through, once again, the control panel. When we add a module, we can define the title of the module. We can define some basic permissions for that module. From there, we'll go in and start dealing with module settings. But let's go ahead and add a module to the page first. So back here to our browser, we're going to go ahead and mouse over the modules menu within the control panel. Within that control panel, we have two options here. We have the ability to add a new module. We have the ability to add an existing module. Adding an existing module allows you to copy a module from a different page. So if you already have content on a page that's configured and you want to share that content on this page, you would choose Add Existing. For us, however, we're going to choose the Add New option. Now when you add a new module, you get a category drop-down list here. By default, it chooses the Common option, and it actually defaults to the HTML Pro module. If you're using Community Edition, it would just be called HTML, but that's fine. There's a few differences between the professional and community editions of the HTML module, but we'll cover those in the module settings. Now, if you want to choose additional modules, you can choose from the admin modules, the professional edition specific modules, or if you choose the all categories option, you would then see a list of all of the modules that are available within DotNetNuke that are currently installed. Now, you only get a list of modules that are installed within your DotNetNuke installation. There are, like I said, thousands of modules available for DotNetNuke. They do not all come installed. You have to be a host or a super user to install extensions. We do talk about that in our previous Explain series about basic site administration. So I'd encourage you to check that one out. For now, we're going to add the HTML Pro module to the page. We can go ahead and give the module a title. Now, I'm going to go ahead and call the title of this module, once again, the same thing I called the page title, Awesome Cycles Products. When we define a title, you'll see that show up within the module here as it gets placed on the page. We can change that title within the module settings after it's added to the page. So you can always come back and update that. Now the next option we have here is visibility. This allows us to control the basic permissions for this module as we place it on the page. We have two options in the visibility drop-down list. When you place a module on the page, should that module be visible to anyone who can view the page, that's the same as page option. So based on your page permissions, the module will show up. The Page Editors Only option allows you to place a module on a page that's only visible to those users who have edit permissions on the page. That's a common approach to placing modules on a page when you're going through and you're configuring the content. You add them so that they're only visible to the page editors. Then once that content is configured, you go back and you update the permissions to make them available to all users or anyone who can view the page. So we're going to choose Page Editors Only as we add this module to the page. From there, we get to choose where we want to place the module. The first option is the pane drop-down list. And if you pull from that drop-down list, you'll see that we have a list of all of the panes that were available within this particular skin. So we can choose from social media, content, left, right, bottom, footer left, footer right, and footer bottom. Now, where you need to place the module is completely up to you from a design and a layout perspective. In a lot of cases, you'll simply add it to the content pane. That was the default pane that was selected. So we'll go ahead and leave it in the content pane. When you're adding a module to a pane, you can choose should it go at the top or the bottom of that pane. That really doesn't come into play until there are other modules in that pane. So right now we have an empty page. We have no modules. It doesn't matter if we add the module to the top or the bottom of the content pane. And if we wanted or we had additional modules in the pane, we can actually insert a module in between other panes. So for here, we're going to go ahead and click on the Add Module option now. That's going to go ahead and add an HTML module here to the products page. Now, a couple things about this particular module. We can see the title of the module that's showing up. The title is Awesome Cycles Products. It has a blue line off to the right side. So the display of the title and that blue line is controlled by what's known as a container. A container is a wrapper that wraps around a module. Containers have the option to display titles. They have the option to display background colors, that you can have a border around a container. You can have a blue line like we have here. Now there are some default containers that come with DotNetNuke, one that has a blue line, one that has a red line, one that has a gray line, I believe. There's also an option or a container that provides that gray rounded box that we saw on the home page. The one that had the 3 links on the right side of the page. That was a specific container. I believe it was called aside. It might have been called aside no title. There are two aside containers included within the default skin. But what you can do is within modules, you can actually control the container that shows up for those modules. And I'll show you where you can do that here in a moment. Now, one quick question I just noticed that came in as we were adding the module to the page. The question says, do the skins control the number of panes and the layout of the panes? The quick answer to that is yes. Depending on the skin you're using on your website, this is the default Dark Knight skin that comes with .NET 6. There are other skins you can download. You can create your own. As you apply skins to the page, they control the number and locations of the panes. Once you have the skin applied, then you can put modules into those panes. Let me point out another thing here within this module. You'll notice that there's a blue box underneath the title of the module, and it tells us that the module is visible by administrators only. It's displaying a message to us because we have not configured the permissions for this module to be visible to anyone except for administrators. So it's kind of a little warning message just to give you a heads up that that's not a public module. No one else can see it except for administrators. Now, from here, we also then have some content that says hover here, click the toolbar to edit content. Essentially, what we need to do in order to start using the HTML modules, we have to go into the Manage button, and we can then choose the Edit Content option. Now, we're going to come back to that in a moment. Before we start working with the content of the HTML module, we're going to talk about the module settings. So to access the module settings, and I kind of skipped right over that, so let me go back here. To access the module settings, and this applies to any module. Doesn't matter if it's an HTML module or a blog module or a forum module. To access the module settings for a module, you're going to mouse over the Manage button, and you're going to click on the Settings option. It should be located within the Admin section of the Manage button. So we're going to click on Settings, and that's going to load up a module settings interface here. Now, module settings have 3 or 4 different tabs across the top that are available to us. The first 3 tabs apply or will be similar across all modules. So the first one is module settings, the second one is permissions, and then page settings. These are settings that will apply no matter what type of module it is. The blog module, the forum module, a form module, an events module, a calendar will always have module settings, permissions, and page settings. Certain modules, such as the HTML module, might have a 4th tab with custom settings for that particular module. Okay, we'll come to each of these tabs here real briefly, but let's start with the first one. The Module Settings tab allows us to define the module title. So if we wanted to update the module title, we could change that here. Right above the module title is a grayed out box. It might be a little hard to see in the webinar, but it says HTML Pro there. If I mouse over it, I get the little red icon, circle with a stripe through it. Basically, I cannot change that. That's just telling me what type of module I have that I'm managing the settings for. So if you have 5 or 6 modules on a page, it's not always easy to know what type of modules are on the page. Well, if you navigate to the module settings, this module section there will tell us what type of module it is. From there, we have a tags option. We don't currently have any tags implemented on our site, so we can't choose any of the taxonomy functionality. There's an advanced settings section. If we go ahead and click on that, it will expand. It allows us to come in and define some default settings for this particular module. Do we want this module to display on all pages? Do we want to hide that blue administrators only box and border that shows up? We could check the box there. We can insert content before and after the module in a header and a footer section for the module. We can also control a start date and an end date for the module. So we could actually turn the module on, say on 5/23, and we could make it go off on 5/24. So DotNetNuke will allow you to kind of set start dates and end dates for modules. If we collapse the advanced settings section and go to added to pages, this section will show you where this module has been copied, if it's been copied to other pages. In this case, this module is brand new. We just placed it on the page. It hasn't been copied to any other pages. From there, we go to the Permissions tab. The permissions, you see a very similar grid to the page permissions, but this time we're applying permissions to an individual module. So here we can decide who can view or edit or delete or export or import, etc. for this module. So we can define granularly at this module if someone has the ability to edit the module. You can also control view permissions for the module. The most common approach to view permissions for a module would be to come in and choose the Inherit View Permissions from Page checkbox, which is listed down below. If you click on that checkbox, the permissions grid will refresh, and you'll notice that the view column is now locked. It has a little lock icon. It means we cannot come in and change those view permissions. The module now follows the permissions of the page. If someone can view the page, they can now view the module. We still have the ability to come in and control the edit permissions, however. The Page Settings tab, if we switch and click on that, takes us to some of the common settings for the module where we can control the container that's being applied to the module. We can assign an icon to the module. We can define a border and a background color for the module. You typically are not going to use the first the first 4 or 5 options here within the basic settings: icon, alignment, color, border, and collapse expand. Those are all settings that are kind of old holdovers of early versions of DotNetNuke but are not primarily used anymore. The display container setting is a setting that you will use. You can control whether a container should be used or not within a module. We're going to go ahead and leave this container, the checkbox, enabled, so it will display our container. Down below, we have another option here called Module Container. This allows us to choose which container should be wrapped around this module. So I saw a question that came through earlier that asked, what's the difference between a container and a pane? A pane is a location you can place modules on a page. A container is a wrapper that goes within the pane but around each of those modules. It's easiest to visualize as a box. So I'm going to go ahead and choose one of the containers that's actually a box that will fully wrap around our module. I'm going to choose the Dark Knight Aside Title container. And you'll see what that does when we update our settings, how it visually wraps our content in a container. There are a variety of containers here. Some of them, for example, the invisible one here is a container, but it really doesn't show anything. It doesn't have a border. It doesn't have a title. It doesn't have a background color to it. So it still wraps around our module, but there's nothing for the end user, the visitor on your website, to see. Containers are important within DotNetNuke because without a container, you could not access the Manage button. So all modules will still have a container, even if it's not visible, if it's set as an invisible container. All right, so let's go ahead and update the setting here real quick and update these settings, and you'll see that a couple of things have changed on our page as I wait for it to reload for everyone. All right, so here within the products page now, we have the title, Awesome Cycles Products. We still have that text that says Hover here, but you'll notice that we now have a gray box wrapped around this particular content. That gray box is coming from the container that we decided or chose to utilize. If we go ahead and mouse back over the Manage button, we go back into our module settings. Let's look at the 4th tab there within our module settings. And within the module settings, that 4th tab are the custom settings for the type of module that we're working with. In this case, we're working with the HTML module settings, or the HTML module, excuse me, so we have HTML module settings. Click on that tab. We have a couple of different options in here. Now, the first two options I'm going to go ahead and just ignore. You will, in almost all cases, never use those two options within the HTML module. The third option here is a HTML Pro and Enterprise Edition specific feature. Within the HTML module, you can actually version and store previous versions of content for that module. In the Community Edition, it defaults to 5 versions. It's not something that you can change. In the Professional Edition, it defaults to 5 versions, but you can change that. So if you want to keep version history for the module, you can increase that version history to be further back than 5 versions. Basically what happens is if you leave it at 5 and you make 6 changes, the very first version gets cut off or gets dumped. And then you would have the history for 2 through 6, etc. So you can come in and update that in the Professional and Enterprise Editions. You also have a workflow option here. Now within the Community Edition, you have 2 workflows, Content Staging and Direct Publish, which basically Direct Publish means when you save the changes in the HTML module, they automatically get saved and applied and published. The Content Staging workflow allows you to save changes, but they're not actually published until you click on a Publish button. Now, there's no approval process built into that. If you have edit rights, you have the ability to publish. In the Professional and Enterprise editions of DotNetNuke, you have the ability to use a content approval workflow, which will allow you to have editors that maintain content in the HTML module, but when they save, they cannot directly publish that content. They have to send it off to an administrator who can then publish that content. You also have the ability in Professional and Enterprise editions to create your own custom workflows, something that's not available in the Community Edition. Now, when you're choosing a workflow, you can choose how it's going to apply to the website or to the page. We'll go ahead and just click on Update here and save those settings. And that updates our HTML module specific settings as well. Now, let's go ahead and to finish things off today, before we get into the Q&A, we're going to go ahead and look at the HTML module and how we can use the HTML module to edit and maintain content on our website. So we are going to run a few minutes longer than our allotted hour time frame here before we get into the Q&A. We'll probably run for another 5 or 10 minutes, and then we'll get into the Q&A. If for some reason you have to disconnect here at 10 o'clock Pacific time, please feel free to go ahead and disconnect. We are recording this session. It will be available live on the website. It will be available on the website, not live, later today. You'll get an email tomorrow with that information as well. So if you do have to disconnect, feel free to go ahead and disconnect, but we are recording things as we go through here. All right, so now we're going to come in and we're going to edit the HTML module. And this is how we're going to typically manage most modules on a .NETNuke website. You're going to go to the module, you're going to mouse over the Manage button, and you're going to look at the first couple of options at the top of the Manage menu. For the HTML module, you get the option of Edit Content. For other modules, you might have an Add Content or an Add Event or an Add Article type of interface. If you have an Articles module, you wouldn't typically have an option to edit the content. You would have an Add Article option, or maybe edit the existing article option. So the Manage button is going to house most of the interface for getting in and maintaining content within a module. Here we're going to just simply click on the Edit Content option. So within the HTML module, that opens up a new window here that allows us to come in and edit the content for that particular module. Within the HTML module, we have the ability to display a summary. As I said previously, you're probably not going to be utilizing the summary functionality within .NETNuke. I've never used it in any of my HTML modules. I haven't had a need. We do have our main content section, and what you'll find within the main content section is the rich text editor. So this rich text editor is a WYSIWYG interface, or a what you see is what you get type interface. Basically, it looks like Microsoft Word. So what we can do here is we can come in and start typing in content. Now, I'm actually going to, instead of typing in a bunch of content here in the webinar, I'm going to copy in some lorem ipsum text that I generated from a lorem ipsum or a Latin generator. Now, what we see here is I've just put in a bunch of content within that particular module. Now, I can come in and start highlighting elements within that content and applying styles and tags to that content. So within the rich text editor here, we have an option to make something bold. I can highlight text and click on the bold icon. You'll see that that text is now bold within the rich text editor. And say maybe on the next paragraph here, I want to underline the first couple of characters there. So I can highlight the text, click on the underline option. Maybe I want to make something italicized. I can highlight the text and click on the italics option. Now what's actually occurring here is within this rich text editor, the text editor is taking our content and wrapping it in HTML tags. Within the editor, we can actually switch into an HTML view, and we can see what that HTML looks like. So if you're more comfortable with editing HTML than you are using a rich text editor, you can still do that within the HTML module here. You can switch to the HTML view and make your changes. We switch back to the design view, we go back to that rich interface. Now there are a lot of other options within the rich text editor. Let's go ahead and demonstrate a couple of those. So within this, or the top here with this first paragraph, what I want to do is I want to insert an image within my content. The rich text editor is going to allow me to do that. I can mouse over the little paperclip icon. That's a symbol for attachments. Within that option, we have an image manager, document manager, flash, media, and image maps. Well, I want to use the image manager. If I go ahead and click on that, it's going to pop up a little interface here, which I can go and I can choose images that are already uploaded to this particular DotNetNuke website. So these are images that come with the DotNetNuke installation. They're just some of the basic images used on the Awesome Cycles template here. So I could choose any of those. I can also upload my own images. So let's say I have a new bicycle image that I want to include here on the products page. Within the image manager, I'm going to choose the upload option, and then I get to browse for the file that I want to upload. Now I have a bike here that I'm going to go ahead and select. If I go ahead and choose upload, you can see that I've now uploaded a new file called bike-1.jpg. When I select it here, the bike shows up on the right side. Now, that particular bike, if we want to see the properties, is actually an image that's 900 pixels wide with a height of 550 pixels. So it's a rather large image. Now we could come in here and just change the height and the width by resizing the image, though that's not recommended. What that's going to ultimately cause is the large image will be loaded and kind of squeezed down into this small little image space. So you're still loading the large image, you're just not displaying it as its original size. That provides typically a bad experience for the visitors of your website. So instead of resizing it using that properties window, within DotNetNuke we can use the image editor. There's an image editor button right above that image, and if I click on that, you can see we get this window here with the image. Now you'll notice that it's kind of hard to see some of this because of the size of the image and the size of our pop-up window. We can expand our pop-up window by clicking on the arrow in the top right corner there. That will allow us to kind of grow the window a little bit. Doesn't really help too much with the bike, but that's okay, because what we can do is within the image editor, we can come in here, we can crop the image. If we wanted to just make an image of the bike seat, we could choose the crop option and then crop the image for just the seat. We can also resize the image. So I'm going to choose the resize option here. Now the original size was 900 pixels. Let's say we want to cut that in half. So I can type 450. It automatically changed the height for me to match. So it links the height and the width there. If I go ahead and click on resize, that's actually gone in and created a new or resized image, a smaller image. From here, what I can do is save this new smaller image. So I'm going to call it bike-1_small.jpg. Click on save. And as the image manager comes back here, we now have bike 1 and we have bike small. And we can choose either of those to insert those into our content. So I'm going to insert the smaller one here. Go ahead and click on Insert, and that bike is now inserted into our content. Now perhaps we want to control the positioning of that bike a little bit, the alignment. So what we would do is click on the bike, and we can try to, let's see if we can do this, say align right or align left. Now one thing you do have to be careful with when you're aligning an image is sometimes when you choose the align option here within the editor, it might be aligning the entire text, not just the image. But we can go ahead and save our text now and see that change. And you can see it didn't align the image just as I wanted to. What I wanted was the image off to the left with some of the text more wrapping on the right side. So what we can do is go back in and edit that content again. So we're back into our rich text editor. And if we right-click on the image, so I left-clicked on it first to select it. I'm going to right-click and choose Properties. What I actually want to do here is in the Align or Image Alignment option, I'm going to choose the Left Align. Click OK. And now you can see in our text editor here that the text wraps around the image in a little bit friendlier manner. Go ahead and click Save again. And our change is saved and visible there on the page. So there are a lot of other features within the HTML's rich text editor. If we go back in to edit that content, I didn't even start to scratch the surface of all the features there, but I'd encourage you to check the rich text editor out, see some of the additional features there. Now within the HTML module, there's actually some additional functionality that we haven't covered. If we go back in and scroll to the top of the HTML module, there are two tabs, Current Content and then Version Tracking. Well, because we have multiple versions within the HTML module, we can actually roll content back within that module. On the Version Tracking tab here, we get a list of all of the various content that's been saved. We have the ability to delete a version, preview a version, and we can also roll back using the rollback, the green icon there. If we wanted to preview the content, we could click on the preview and it would actually preview down below. So you can kind of preview some of those prior versions as well without having to come in and actually roll back in order to preview what that content looked like. So as I said, in the version tracking information, out of the box, .NETNuke Community Edition only allows you to have 5 previous versions. Professional and Enterprise Edition default to 5, but that's a setting that can be changed within those paid editions of .NETNuke. All right, so that's the content that we were going to try to cover today. Sorry we ran a little bit over time today. I've got a lot of questions here. I'm going to spend 15 or 20 minutes or however long it takes to go through and answer some of those questions. If you have any additional questions, please feel free to go ahead and start typing those in. In the meantime, before I get to the questions, I'd encourage you to check out some of our other .NETNuke Explained series webinars. We have one on installing .NETNuke, portal administration, skinning, module dev, upgrades, and then today's content edits and updates webinar. The recordings are available for all the previous ones. Please feel free to go ahead and check those out on our website. We also have a .NETNuke training subscription, which gets you access to all of our recorded training. We have over 80 hours of recorded training sessions available. We're also doing another 30 hours of live training coming up here in the next 2 to 3 months, starting at the end of June, going through July and early August. So all of our training subscribers get access to the recordings from those sessions. They also get to attend those sessions live. Those are far more in-depth sessions than just our free Explained series, these short 1-hour sessions. So I'd encourage you to check out the training subscriptions. If you have any questions on those, please feel free to email me at training@dnncorp.com, and I'll try to address those questions. All right, so let's go back and answer some of the questions that have been coming in throughout the session here. So I'll start at the top, try to work my way down. If you have any additional ones, please feel free to go ahead and type those in now. All right. First question says, if we're editing the HTML module, how can we add scripts to the module for jQuery? Right now, within the HTML module, you cannot add jQuery or JavaScript. The module itself will strip out that functionality. or those scripts. What I would recommend is you put those scripts within the header or footer setting within the module settings. The header and footer settings do not get stripped of their JavaScript. I think you can turn off some of the stripping within the HTML module using the manage HTML, or the HTML management within the host settings, but I haven't tried to do that lately. I typically put my JavaScript in within the header or footer settings rather than within the content of the HTML module. That strips that out just from security purposes. A lot of cross-site scripting occurs through malicious JavaScript, so if you allow people to edit content or maintain content on your website that might have the ability to, or might have the intentions of doing cross-site scripting, that's kind of why that's there, why it does strip out automatically. Another question here says, how can we change the way that our page links are displayed on the top, change the look of the background, or customize the search to have my company's specific graphic? So changing the navigation, changing the search section up at the top, that's all maintained through the skin within .NETNuke. So you'd have to go in and make changes to the skin or create a custom skin in order to make those types of changes. Another question here says, I noticed on the modules on the page, some of them have a colored line after the text. Is there a way to remove the colored line so that only the text or only the module title is displayed? So that colored line is dependent upon the container. So various containers do various things. Some containers have the colored line, some just show a title, some don't show anything, some show the background, the gray border that we saw, the gray background color. So really depends on the container you're using. What I would encourage you to do is check out some of the containers within the default skin in .NETNuke and see what those look like, see if there's one that fits your needs. Another question that showed up later applies to this as well. If you're looking for how to tell what a container does or what a skin does, under the admin menu there is a skins page. You can preview containers and skins from that page. Check out our intro to skinning explained webinar from a couple weeks ago. We talked more about that there as well. This is a non-related question to the topic, but I'll go ahead and answer it. It says, when managing user accounts, particularly when adding a new user, if the password doesn't meet the validation rules, it's not displaying an error message. That's unfortunately a known bug in .NETNuke. It is fixed in the .NETNuke 6.2 release, which is coming out towards the end of this month, but it's currently a bug in the earlier versions of DNN. So basically, .NETNuke has a minimum password length of 7 characters. It's a requirement, and if someone doesn't type in 7 characters, it just will not register them. It doesn't currently display a message to tell them that they need to put in 7 characters or more for their password. So it's a bug, known bug, that is addressed in the next release of .NETNuke. Question here says, please show how you would assign a new page to the footer link. Footer links are typically controlled by the skin, so if you wanted to add links into the footer, you would do that by modifying the skin itself. Let's see. Question here says, if you delete the login module from the page, will the query string parameter of $CTL equal login still work? Yes, if you delete the module from the login module from a page or the login link from a page, passing in the query string parameter will still tell .NETNuke to load the module itself. Another question here says, is there a limit to the number of modules and panes you can add? As far as I know, there's no upper limit. I'm sure there's an upper limit somewhere out there, but it's probably far greater than anyone would ever need. You can essentially have as many panes on a skin and as many modules within those panes as you wish. Now, from a usability perspective, I don't recommend that you create a skin that has 100 panes on it, because it becomes hard for editors to know where their content should go if they have 100 different places they could put their content. So you want to be careful about the options that you do provide. The DNN is that flexible, but that doesn't always mean it's the best approach for your content editors. A question here says, can you choose the container when you add a module instead of having to go to the settings after the module is added? Unfortunately, no, you can't choose a container when you're adding the module. You can only adjust it in the settings. That being said, you can have a default container defined at the page level, and you can have a default container defined at the website level. So the way it works is when you place a module on a page, if the module setting doesn't have a container defined, it will look for a container setting at the page level. If the page doesn't have a setting defined, it will look for the container setting at the portal level. So there are a couple of ways you can change the default container on the page or on the website as a whole. Otherwise, if you need to choose a different container when you're placing it on a page, you just have to do that after the module is on the page. That's where I would recommend using permissions. So if you need to add a module to a page but you don't want it to be visible with the wrong container, add the module so it's only visible to administrators. Go into the module settings, change the container, and change the permissions to make the module then visible, update the settings, and then it should show up there. Question here says, regarding the start and stop dates for the modules, this also applies to pages, even though we didn't look at the start and end dates for pages. Those are based on the server time, so it's 12 a.m. server time of the day or the date that you choose for the start or the end date. You can't within DNN define that a module shows up at a certain time. It's just on a certain date. So it's midnight on that date based on the server time. Question here says, what are tags and why are they important? So tags within DotNetNuke are the ability to start to apply taxonomy and categorization and folksonomy to your content. They're important when you want to utilize them to provide different ways for users to access your content. But it really takes a lot of work to go through and set that up and maintain those. What I would recommend, I believe we have a video in our video library found under the resources tab on our website that talks about how to configure tags and categories. You have to go through and do that before you can really start to utilize them within your pages and within your modules. Question here says, where do we adjust the CSS for a container? So if you're trying to change the CSS for a container, you can do that in a variety of locations. The easiest way is to actually make a change to a file called portal.css. You can override the container styles. Sometimes you'll do that within your skin, sometimes in the container, sometimes in that portal.css file. If you want to make it directly to the container, though, you just go into the containers CSS file, which is typically loaded in the root of your website. There's a folder called portals. Within that folder is a folder called _default, and then you would find a containers folder. And then within that, you'd find the individual containers. Check out our Intro to Skinning webinar from a couple weeks ago. We talked more about skins and containers within that webinar. Let's see. I think I answered this question already. Basically says, is there a way to see what a container looks like before selecting it? You would do that from that admin skins page where you can preview containers and skins. Question here says, when you're using a different module, such as an image module, is there a way that you can lock the module so that users cannot save the file or print the module in order to protect the author's copyright? I don't know of any modules that have that functionality built into the module, but users or people that do that now, and this isn't just for .NET websites, would do that typically with some advanced JavaScript. So if you could find that advanced JavaScript, you can include that within your own .NET website to utilize that type of functionality. Question here says, how do you make a module global so that when you make a change to the module, it updates all modules throughout the site, no matter which page you make the change on? So that's actually done through the module settings. There is a module setting called Display on All Pages. When you check that box, that will take that module that you're currently working with, and it will put that module on every page of your website. Now, the module will go into the pane that it is currently in. So if you're working with a module that's in the left pane, and you display that module on all pages, on every page of the website, that module will show up in the left pane. as long as there is a left pane on the skin on every page of your website. If there is not a left pane, the module will end up in the content pane. Every skin of every .NET website has a content pane. It has to. Beyond that, you're not guaranteed that every skin has a left pane. So you do need to be careful when you're using the display on all pages function. So we'll look for a specific pane. If it can't find that pane, it will go into content pane. But once you've done that, once you've checked display on all pages, no matter where you edit that module, it will update every module across the website. They share the same content. Question here says, if I start with Community Edition, will I have an issue if I want to try to upgrade to the Professional Edition? You shouldn't. Upgrading to the Professional Edition is really straightforward. It's actually the same process you would follow if you were just upgrading to a newer version of the Community Edition. You perform the same steps. The files that you use are a little different, but the steps there to do the upgrade are actually the same. So upgrading from Community to Professional is pretty easy and straightforward. Question here says, if I build a site in .NET and the customer chooses to move their website, can I export the entire site and move it to another host? So the simple answer to that is yes. The more complex answer is yes, with depending on what you're actually doing, there are a couple of different ways you can go about that. The .NET website is really files in a database. So you can back up the files, back up the database, and then restore that information onto a different web host and set .NET up in the same way. Now, if you're mixing customers within one installation of .NET where you have different customers that each have their own portal, you can still do that import and export of that backup and restore. It just is a little more difficult. There's a little more work involved because you would want, as you restore the backup on a new host, you would have to then go in and delete all of the customers that weren't moving. I typically do not run multiple websites within my .NET installations. Every website that I manage has its own .NET installation. It prevents me from running into any issues like that. Question here says, where do I go to make the default page permission on new pages to be viewable by all users? Unfortunately, there isn't a way to set the default page permissions when you create a new page using the admin or the control panel pages menu. It will not. It will basically go to view permissions based on who's creating the page. If you use the add option instead of the add new page section right in the control panel, if you just click on the add link, that takes you to a more defined interface for creating a page. From there, you can adjust the permissions as you're creating the page. So that's probably the better approach for you. Let's see. Question here says, do keyboard shortcuts work in the rich text editor? Some of the basic ones do. Bold, underline, italicized I know work. Control-K works for adding or editing a hyperlink. I'm not sure which other ones there are available, but I believe, let me see if I can find this here. If you mouse over the items in the control panel, you can actually see the ones that do have keyboard shortcuts. They show up in parentheses next to the option. Just a quick pass through here. It looks like just bold, italicized, and underlined offhand have a keyboard shortcut, as well as the hyperlink manager and the remove hyperlink options. But beyond that, I don't believe there are many other shortcuts. Control-Z, Control-Y for undo or redo is a shortcut as well. Question here says, once I build my website, how will the search engines be aware my site is ready for the public and appear in these search engines? That's a whole nother discussion, but the simple approach to that is you can submit your websites to the search engines. I personally find it better that if you have another website that links to your website, if that other website's already indexed, that will oftentimes get your website indexed faster than if you use the submission process. Though, to be honest, I haven't used the submission process in many years because I have too many sites. I just create a quick blog link to the new site, and that typically picks it up. Question here says, what are the best ways to manage my website? Question here says, what are the best ways to manage my website? Question here says, what are the best ways to manage my website? Question here says, does .NET support HTML5? It does, though if you want to use HTML5, it's recommended that you would have your own custom skin. That being said, I think I was incorrect. Let me check something. I think the default skin in .NET is actually defined for HTML5 as the doc type, and I can see that by viewing the source, looking at the doc type defined up above. So the default skin in .NET does use HTML5 as a doc type. So that being said, if you're using the default skin, you can go in and start using HTML5 right out of the box. Question here says, can you assign CSS classes to content? You can. You can do that within the rich text editor. You can also switch to the HTML view and assign it the CSS there in the HTML view. You can include CSS within the HTML of the content itself. That's typically a frowned upon approach. A frowned upon approach. You wouldn't want to include the style itself within the content because that's inline CSS, which becomes very difficult to override. Where you would typically put that inline CSS would be in the portal.css file, which you can find from the admin site settings page. Question here says, are you able to force the use of CSS and disable some of the rich text editor options? So within the rich text editor, we looked at the out-of-the-box configuration. There is an HTML manager, or it's a link under the host menu. I forget exactly what it's called, but it's one of the last options in the first section. You can go through and restrict features within the rich text editor, and this is all editions of .NET Nuke. You can go through and restrict some of the features. So you can turn off some of the toolbar options within the rich text editor to prevent people from doing HTML that you don't want them to. Question here says, how do you integrate the events module with GoToWebinar? That's beyond the scope of what we're talking about here today. Question here says, is .NET Nuke 6.1.5, the current release, upgradable to .NET Nuke 6.2? And the answer to that is yes. We always try to maintain backwards compatibility from version to version. So if you're on .NET Nuke 4.9.5 right now, you should be able to upgrade to 6.2 when it comes out. Some of the older versions do require a couple of different upgrade steps, but if you're on 6.15 or if you're on any version of 6, going to 6.2 should be pretty straightforward. Question here says, I understand DNN 6 has 2 installed HTML editors. Which one do you recommend that you use? I believe DNN 6 only has 1 editor installed unless you've upgraded from previous versions. If you've upgraded, then you would still have previous editors there. I recommend using the default one out of the box there. I think it's just listed as the RAD editor provider. That's one I use. Question here says, can the security be updated in batch? I'm assuming you're talking about permissions. You can update page permissions from a parent page down to all of the children. So you can apply permissions at a parent page level and then force those permissions down to all child pages. Question here says, how granular can we set the security? That really depends. If you're on the community edition, you can control who can view and edit pages or who can view and edit modules. In professional and enterprise editions, you have a lot more granular access there. You can control who can add to a page or who can edit a page, who can copy from a page or delete a page, etc. You can make those all unique. Let's see what else we got here. Question here says, once a content is published, will it send email to all those who have access to the content or who have subscribed for that content? .NET Nuke itself right now doesn't have any notifications for users to be able to subscribe to content that changes. Using the workflow, it will send notifications to various steps in the workflow or the people who have various permissions in that workflow. So they can get notifications when content has changed and it's waiting on them to do something to approve it. But just regular users can't necessarily subscribe to individual content, at least not out of the box. There's probably modules that would do that. So there's another question here about jQuery. I mentioned that it was stripped. How do you add the jQuery code? So adding jQuery code you have to put into the header or footer setting of a module. So you go into the module settings, and on the module settings you would go to the advanced section, and in the header or footer section you would put that jQuery or JavaScript code in there. Question here says, does DotNetNuke accept DITA markup? I'm not sure what that is. If you want to go ahead and elaborate, I'll try to answer that, but I don't recognize the acronym DITA. Question here says, let's say I set up a site with information for a product and all the related content for that product. Is it possible to give access to just certain portions of the website? So you can, using permissions and using the view permissions, you can go through and assign permissions to certain sections of the page, so people can go in and view certain aspects, but you would have to have them log in and utilize security roles to define who can view which portions of the page. I got a comment here about not wrestling the microphone. I apologize if I was wrestling the microphone today. I don't recall doing so, but that's not to say I didn't do it subconsciously. Question here says, for a more secure host or secure install, should I change the host username? From a security perspective, yes. If you change the username to something else, obviously you would have to know what that username is. But for most websites, and this would be a security thing, most .NET websites, there is a user named host. And from a security perspective, if someone knows a username, all they have to do is hack in and get the password or try some password procedures to get in. If they don't know the username, then they have to figure out a username and a password, so that does make it more complex from a security perspective. You can change the username of the host account when you're setting up .NET Nuke. You cannot change a username afterwards. You can only do it during the installation. If you wanted to change a username afterwards, you would essentially create a new user and delete the old user. That's the approach for changing usernames in DNN. Let's see. Another part of that question was, is it best to have a brand new install of .NET Nuke 6.2 or to upgrade from 6.15? That really depends on where you're at with your existing site. I wouldn't recommend that you start over completely when .NET Nuke 6.2 comes out. If you already have a website up and running, you've got content, then go about an upgrade. If you're just now starting a project on .NET Nuke, 6.2 is coming out next week sometime. If you can hold off a couple days until next week, then I would encourage you to go about that. But at the same time, if you have to start today, just download 6.15 and upgrade to 6.2 when it becomes available. All right, I think that's all the questions we've had so far today. So I thank everyone for attending today. I will go ahead and stop the recording here, get the video recording processing so we can get that uploaded. And like I said, you guys should receive an email tomorrow with access to that particular recording. Apologize if we had any audio issues today. I got a comment here that says, now my voice is clear. I think I know what was causing the issue before, but I'll try to address that for future sessions. Thanks again for attending, and best of luck with your .NET Nuke websites.